Tonight, I am starting a new book. The book is Everyday Consciousness and Primordial Awareness by Thrangu Rinpoche. Frequently, he is referred to as Khenchen Thrangu Rinpoche. And Khenchen is an abbreviation that is a syllable from each of two words, Ken meaning Khenpo and Chen meaning Chenpo. Great Khenpo. I'm going to start with the translator's introduction, and the translator is Suzanne Shevzik. That's the best I can do with the pronunciation of that last name. She says that Thrangu Rinpoche is one of the most learned masters of the Karma Kagyu lineage. As I mentioned, he has a title of Khenchen, which means great scholar. And after fleeing India, he was head of the Shedra in Rumtek, the Shedra being basically graduate school for people that wanted to learn more about Tibetan Buddhism. So some of his students were the four great lineage holders, Jamgon Khantrul, Tai Situ Rinpoche, Gyaltsap Rinpoche, and Shamarpa Rinpoche. And he also, after Gyalwang Karmapa fled, became the main tutor for Gyalwang Karmapa. He also has educated many of the great scholars and teachers of the Kagyu lineage. I am certain that Mingyur Rinpoche attended the Shedra there. I know that Ponlop Rinpoche was there. So he's had a tremendous impact on the Kagyu lineage because of his teaching and his scholarship, as well as his high level of realization. Khenpo Karta Rinpoche was close to Thrangu Rinpoche. Khenpo Rinpoche went to Thrangu Monastery when he was a young man or a boy. And at this time, the previous Thrangu Rinpoche was there, but very close to the end of his life. And my understanding is when this young Thrangu Rinpoche was discovered and brought back to the monastery, that Khenpo Karta Rinpoche was kind of in charge of keeping an eye on this little boy. And they were very close. They fled Tibet together. And when the 3-year retreat that I was in order to do the 3-year retreat, we had to receive a large number of empowerments. And Khenpo Karta Rinpoche invited Thrangu Rinpoche to come and lead these empowerments. And that is exactly what happened. So those of us that were in the first 3-year retreat at Karma Ling received a large number of empowerments from Thrangu Rinpoche. My observation of the two of them playing the Damaru together and the bell and so forth, they were like, well, let's just say they were synchronized. They acted almost like they were twins. Now, Thrangu Rinpoche has come to the West for decades. The book came out in 2001, and in there, the translator said that he has been coming to the West for 20 years, so you can add another 20 years to that. And I have seen him, besides at Karma Ling, I have seen him other places. A few years ago, he was in Canada. And I flew over to Toronto and went to the center there, which was Lama Tashi Center, and he did some teaching and gave an empowerment there. And there is another monastery in Vancouver that is his, and he does spend time there too. In 2008, Khenpo Rinpoche led a group from KTD, and I was part of that group, and we went and visited him in his monastery outside of Kathmandu, Namo Buddha, and I received my full monastic vows from him. So I have a strong connection with Thrangu Rinpoche. The book is taken from two different talks that Thrangu Rinpoche gave in Germany. One was based on Mipam Rinpoche's book, Gateway to Knowledge, and the other was based on a book by the third Karmapa, Distinguishing Consciousness from Primordial Awareness. And these books don't totally agree on every fine point. The translator, through a lot of consultation with Thrangu Rinpoche and other translators, put together these books in such a way that there is little contradiction within them. And also, Suzanne served as an interpreter for these talks, but she retranslated the talks and started from scratch, preparing for this book. The talks describe the fruition of mind, the fruition of perception and consciousness, how our ordinary consciousness and ordinary perception and ordinary, I hesitate to use ordinary mind because that refers to actually enlightened mind, but our ordinary confused mind. These are contrasted to our Buddha awareness and the 5 Buddha families. Thrangu Rinpoche also has some meditation instructions included in this book and ways that we can enhance our development as we uncover our primordial awareness. The translator says that it's really important to translate these teachings properly, and it's actually quite difficult to do a good job of that. She mentioned that even that these teachings were given in Germany and originally translated into German, but Tibetan language has not been thoroughly clarified as Tibetan to English. And that brought up the point that the written Tibetan language was developed specifically for translating Sanskrit texts into Tibetan, and that the Tibetan alphabet comes from the Sanskrit alphabet. It's different, but it is highly influenced by the Sanskrit alphabet. The reason being that if they could not write down these texts in Tibetan, they would be easily lost or just kept through memory. They could easily be, among other things, just plain forgetting. Changes could enter, and so they really needed to be written down. The contents of this book, in many ways, has connotations on Western psychology. The book is about Buddhist psychology, but it also has a bearing on Western psychology. And the translator said that she wanted to be extra careful that the two would not be confused, that the two would not be blurred. Quote, "This is also why at the end of the book I included a detailed glossary of the Tibetan terminology in my corresponding translation." So at the very end of the book is this glossary. It begins with a glossary of the actual Tibetan words, and then after that there's a glossary of the English words and a definition of the English words in more English words. She says too that there can always be more development in terms of translating these profound Tibetan texts and concepts and words into English. She also added, which were not present in either of these 2 talks, the transformation of the 5 elements into the 5 female Buddhas, and a few other aspects of this Buddha awakening and the 5 Buddha families. One of the reasons why I chose this book is because it goes into in great depth these 5 Buddha families, their qualities, the transformation of the various elements, our kleshas, and so on and so forth into enlightened qualities. Now, he talked about the science of cognition. Of course, there are 2 different basic schools here, the Hinayana and the Mahayana. On the Hinayana, I'm going to probably not pronounce these correctly, but I'm going to give a shot at it. Vaibhashika and Sautantrika. These were covered in that book by Taisita Rinpoche, ground path and fruition. And these are very early traditions in Buddhism in India. And then in the Mahayana, it's the Chitta Mantra and the Madhyamakas that went into this in more detail, the nature of mind and the science of cognition. So I'm going back here to Tai Situ Rinpoche's book, and he talks about the two schools. One was by followers of Nagarjuna, and the other one was Middle Way Consequence School, or the Prasangika. The Sautantrikas, they were very fundamental. They stuck to the sutras, the actual words of the Buddha. The Vaibhashikas, they were called the autonomous school that accords with the particularists. I'm not going to go into this too much, but again, being very, you might say, picky, going into their logical arguments, becoming very detailed. But there was not this idea of emptiness. Chitta Mantra is the mind-only school. Basically looked at everything that is experienced by mind, and therefore there really is nothing that exists outside of mind. Now, these things are going to be brought up. It might not be obvious which one of them is being talked about. The Madhyamakas are really the philosophical school that most of the Kagyu lamas follow. They talk about valid cognition. Different schools view this valid cognition differently. So the translator, for example, says, quote, when Rinpoche says the consciousness leaves through the gate of the eye to be able to perceive outer form, this is on page 22. As soon as he says that, she says, the question arises, how is it possible that the consciousness, which is mind, can come into contact with a sense object, which is matter? As she answers this question by saying, this is not a question for us alone. This was one of the problems that sparked differing views on the absolute truth of the different philosophical schools of Buddhism. So this is an age-old problem, and they all looked at it a little bit different. Going through these different schools very briefly, from the point of the Vaibhashika school, consciousness, sense faculties, and sense objects can actually make contact, and therefore the mind perceives its object. The Sautantrikas, the outer reality cannot be directly perceived at all. Therefore, the objects leave an image of themselves in the mind, so that this image may be perceived by mental consciousness. The Chitta Mantra school doubted the existence of outer reality. Since mind perceives mind anyway, what's the point of having an outer reality? We don't need it. It's just an inner reality that is mind only. And then the Madhyamaka schools, they would go a little further, which is, quote, if outer perceived objects do not exist truly and independently, then how could a perceiver of these objects exist in such a way? So I told you that I was going to get a little bit technical here. Here is a final quote that I think is, hopefully you'll find helpful. Buddhist scholars teaching about mind still use the terminology of the Sautantrikas, even if their own ultimate view differs, since it is quite readily understandable by ordinary people. So now you can have a little bit of a sigh of relief. It might seem contradictory in places, but the language that Thrangu Rinpoche uses and the translator uses tries to be what is most understandable and accessible to the people that they are talking to. The translator continues on and say that we have to distinguish between the conventional terminology and what is meant by the individual philosophical school of thought by this conventional terminology. So she mentions here again in another place in the book that Thrangu Rinpoche says the attainment of primordial awareness, whereas you actually don't attain primordial awareness. It's not to be developed. It is to be more or less uncovered because it's already been present from the beginningless beginning. Thrangu Rinpoche in this book will reveal methods to uncover it. So that is my brief covering of the editor's introduction. And next comes the introduction by Thrangu Rinpoche. The book here is to explain the difference between our everyday, ordinary, confused consciousness and perception and primordial awareness of a Buddha. He feels that this is a very important topic, and it is very beneficial for any practitioner. Mind can be looked at as being composed of 6 parts, or sometimes 8, or collections of consciousness is perhaps a better way of putting this. 6 collections of consciousness or 8 collections of consciousness. Quote, "This is a very specific classification of mind as generally taught in Buddhist philosophy, but one which is comprehensible by means of inference," end quote. So anyone and everyone who meditates, who does Vajrayana practices of visualizing the deity and mandalas and so forth, all of these will receive great benefit from knowing about the condition of mind and these 8 consciousnesses. So he has a list of people or types of people that can benefit from this practice or reading this book. Whoever meditates doing shamatha, this helps understand what's going on and to rest in shamatha meditation and open awareness. Then there is the insight meditation, Vipassana, and this is, of course, in Vajrayana, not in the Hinayana type of Vipassana. Here, there's a great benefit because we're able to understand a little bit about our experience of the innate essence and the various forms that it can manifest when we are doing investigative introspection meditation. He says that Western psychology and psychotherapy can benefit from studying these 8 collections of consciousness in their purified form. That he felt that there's a lot of interest, and I would agree with him. There is a lot of interest in Western psychology in what the Buddhists have discovered about the nature of mind and how it works. So this is talking about how our ordinary confused mind works. It's also important to understand primordial awareness. This is the fruit that results from practicing and from studying. This is about our ultimate primordial awareness. So it's important to know how these results can be attained and what they are like. Ultimately, the highest result that we can experience is becoming a fully enlightened Buddha. And yet we still have to work with, you might say, our present situation and the world that we live in. He warns against wanting to develop extraordinary powers to show off or to somehow or another feel that if I develop this power, I won't have to worry. I'm protected in some way or another. On the other hand, if we are able to reveal even a little bit of this, it is absolutely wonderful. He then talks about the 3 types of wisdom. Prajna is the word that he uses. And it is, you've heard this list before, it is the wisdom that arises from listening, the wisdom that arises through reflecting on what you have heard, and then the wisdom that arises through meditating. And through these, we travel the path, and primordial awareness becomes fully revealed. And as a result of this primordial awareness being revealed, then this will also help purify our obscurations. And eventually we attain Buddhahood. We become a Buddha. He talks about the Tibetan word for Buddha, which is Sang and Ge. He says that in India, they would just use the word Ge, which means here it is translated as expanded. I've also heard it translated as blossom, meaning that our Buddha qualities have fully expanded or fully blossomed. The Sang has been added in the Tibetan, which means purified, and that means that all the obscurations have been purified and are absent. The Tibetan word for Buddha then means both the blossoming of the qualities and also the removal of all the impurities, all the negative karma, and so forth.